Hello and welcome back to Genesis Designs and Modelcraft, and welcome back to even more modelling for beginners with the Airfix Bolt and Paul Defiant. So this is episode 2, and in episode 2 we are going to paint these parts. We're going to add photo etch, do weathering and see how it goes, but hopefully get a complete cockpit at least and maybe get the fuselage together. So first things first, planning the paint job. I keep on talking about planning, don't I? It's always useful to have an idea of the end goal, even if you don't reach it specifically. If you have an idea of what you're trying to achieve, it should be a little bit easier to sort of build your layers to get to that point. I'm going to do a little bit of chipping because everybody likes it. I'm ambivalent honestly, but I think a bit of chipping within the cockpit isn't a ridiculous thing to do. So to that end, I will first be laying down some silver, and I'm going to put silver on the oil tank, the seat frames, the rudder pedal area here, and this footboard area where over the top of these pipes is this area here. That's it. There's no point putting silver anywhere you don't need it. For that aluminium colour I will be using Tamiya lacquer paint LP11. This is just a basic standard common or garden silver lacquer paint. Any silver paint will do for this. The UK interior green colour then, this is mine. Nominally it's Mr Colour C364, but in actuality what's in here is not Mr Colour C364. The original colour was too grey and too dark anyway, and I just added some sky to it, and essentially this just keeps getting topped up. And what I put in it is Tamiya XF71 acrylic. As you can see, this is not a terrible rendition anyway. If you want a darker UK interior green, this will suffice. This is IJN cockpit green, but it's, as you can see, it's ballpark similar. But to that I always add sky. Now if I put the two together, you can see tonally they are very similar. This is very much a lighter shade of this. So by adding sky, what I'm doing is lightening this colour without sort of completely washing off the colour like you will if you add too much white. And sometimes there's a bit of white in there as well. Certainly the original mix had white in it, but generally speaking my interior green is about a 50-50 mix of these two colours. Now these parts are in silver. I know it isn't terribly obvious, but I've painted silver on the floor, all the places I said I would. Now I think I'm going to leave the oil tank silver. Aluminium lacquer is a very common internal colour on these older aircraft, and I think it'll just be nice to maybe be able to see a hint of it peeping out beneath the dashboard, so I'm just going to leave that silver, and I'm going to put some hairspray on to these other parts so that I can artistically chip the areas back once I've got the green on. So I've got this My Hair Matters firm hold hairspray. I don't know where I got it from, but just any old supermarket hairspray is fine, and a can like this will last literally years. And the reason I'm showing you this is because I'll often say glibly, I just decanted some hairspray, and no one knows what I even mean by that. Now with hairspray, to be honest, I do this in an extremely untechnical way. If you need to decant a lot of paint, it's useful to use a straw to concentrate it so it doesn't go everywhere, because when you spray into the cup of the airbrush it has a tendency to fire itself straight back out again because of the pressure. So do be careful of that. I'll get a piece of paper, and I've cleaned the airbrush out, as you can see. I'm just gonna, no frills, squirt some of that in there. I got some on my thumb. Don't know if I did that on camera or not, sorry. I'll try. Oh god, it stinks. I used to spray this all over my hair. Try again. On camera, literally, whoosh, spray some in. Try not to have anything important nearby when you do this, as I say. It's got a tendency to go all over. So there, a little bit of hairsprays in my airbrush now. And now I can apply that with the airbrush in exactly the same way that I would with any other paint. And the reason that we use, or that I use hairspray, I mean it's very cheap for one, but it is water soluble. If any of you used to do the hairstyles, used to dread the rain because it would just make your hair just collapse, wouldn't it? This will dry to a hard shell clear, but as soon as it gets touched with any water it just melts straight off, and that's why we use it, and that is actually what we want it to do. And so what I'm going to do, as I say, is put a decent coat of this clear hairspray on top of these silver parts. Now that the hairspray is on, it needs to be left to dry. It doesn't need very long to dry at all. That's dry enough. And then I'm going to go straight in and spray the green paint on. As I said, this is basically Tamiya acrylic in here now. And I'm going to spray the green onto all of the parts, not just these, except the instrument panel, that doesn't need it. And the control column, that can be silver. Yeah, I'm going to spray all the parts that require to be green. I'm not going to prime the plastic, there really isn't any need, and I'm not going to do any pre-shading. Back again, and now the parts are green, as you can see, and very, very flat, as befits the Tamiya acrylic finish. So to the chipping. It's difficult to give definitive advice on exactly how long you should leave the paint to dry, because it does depend on what chipping fluid you're using, what paint you're using, all kinds of variables like that. Some paints chip off really, really easily and you need to leave them for a little while to dry. Other paints are quite difficult to chip, so you need to get it done quite quickly, otherwise it won't really work. So what do you need? You need an paintbrush to chip with. This is just an absolutely ordinary standard paintbrush which does have quite stiff bristles, and I have cut it way down, as you can see, and that gives a nice stiff stipply brush. And I've got just some ordinary tap water in a glass on the side, and all I'm going to do is put some water on the brush and start to gently scrub on the areas that I think I want a bit of chipping to happen. You'll start doing it, and initially you'll be like, yep, nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden there it goes. I hope you can see that. And once it does start to lift, it will lift quite substantially and quite quickly, so just be really, really careful and make sure you get an effect you're happy with, and then stop. It may be relatively obvious that this is not a great way of doing chipping if you want to be very specific about your chips. There. I often use a kind of a sort of a stabbing motion just to get the bristles to really poke the paint, just to help it to dislodge. Let's blow dry it, just to sort of damage that paint surface, because what you want to happen is that hairspray, that dissolvable layer that's between the green and the silver, is what's going to allow this to happen. So as soon as you start to erode away that top layer, the water can get at that hairspray underneath and it will just let everything randomly lift off, and the effects can be really, really pleasing. I find that pure acrylic paints do chip a lot more easily, but in fact I find that they chip too easily, and I find it quite difficult actually to get nice sort of chips that to me look sensible. That's why I say experimentation will be required using the paints that you use. Lacquer paints are much, much more difficult to chip, much more difficult than Tamiya acrylics, even though this Tamiya acrylic does have Mr. Colour thinner in, which makes it a touch hardier than it would otherwise be, but it's still quite easy to do. Bearing in mind though that I only painted these parts maybe 10 minutes ago. If you paint the parts and leave them overnight, it's going to be difficult to get the chips to happen. If it chips too easily and you find that you're not pleased with the result, the simplest thing to do is paint back over it and start again. It's difficult to repair chips once they've gone awry, unfortunately. And yes, I do have a green finger. And all we're doing is we're just trying to suggest a bit of use, a bit of wear, high traffic areas, parts of the interior that get stood on all the time, parts that get rubbed by the pilot's clothes all the time, get hit by the seat belts and the straps, and allows the paint to wear away. Our aircraft did survive for a little while, so I think it's reasonable to expect that a bit of chipping happened. I know a lot of people like to say things like, "Whoa, these wartime aircraft didn't last long enough for this kind of thing to happen." No, maybe in some cases they didn't, but the paint coatings were nowhere near as effective as modern ones either, so there we go. Wear and tear. Okay, when you're happy with the chipping, which I now am, what you need to do is let this paint dry again, because it's just been thoroughly infused with water. That water needs to dry off, and then I'm going to paint all of these parts with X22 clear, thinned with Mr. Colour thinner. Remember, what's in this jar is already 50/50 thinners, and I will thin it a touch more, though not a lot more, to paint all of these parts to provide a sort of a soft sheen, which will be able to withstand washes, and we'll be able to add decals and what have you to it without any issues. So that will be the next step, and when that's done and dry, I'll be back with more. Back again then. It is in fact the next day, so the day after I did the chipping and X22 layer, and as you can easily see, this has dried back to that nice soft sheen. It's just a little bit shinier than the naked paint was, but not so shiny that it needs a matte coat when everything's finished. This I find to be just ideal, because I don't want to have to matte coat the cockpit parts necessarily, and you will find that using washes and what have you will further dull this finish a little bit. And what I've also done in the meantime is done a little bit of assembly. So the pilot seat, I've painted the leather backrest piece, and I've glued it to its frame along with those side frame pieces, and then the front bulkhead I've just glued on that silver oil tank. So the next thing to do really is to put some wash on most of these parts, because whilst the wash is drying I can switch my attention to starting to add the photo etch to the instrument panel and things like that. And for the wash, I'm going to use my now basic go-to and favourite wash, which is Tamiya Panel Line Accent Colour. This is an enamel wash, a ready-made enamel wash in much the same vein as the AK and Ammo of MiG enamel washes, but because this is made by Tamiya, it doesn't go off in the jar and it continues to work. It's only available in I think 6 or maybe 8 shades, and I do have them all. I bought them in America, so apologies to my British followers. These don't seem to be available in this country, readily available in this country over the counter at this point, but they're easily available via normal online channels. You can buy them from your Far East online shops like Lucky Model and such, and actually you can get them on eBay as well. They're not the cheapest, but there is quite a lot in here, and they are going to last. These are already a year old and they're absolutely fine, and they do separate when they're left for a while, just the same as the ammo ones do, But unlike the ammo ones, they then recombine themselves and mix back up. And the reason I'm holding these two colours is because that's what I'm going to use here. So I wanted the dark grey, but the dark grey alone wouldn't really show up the way I want, so I've added a little grey, because you can mix these together. Don't be put off by the fact that there are relatively few shades, because you can make all manner of dingy, dirty colours with the shades which are available. So here in this little palette, I've mixed together, I think, about 5 or 6 drops of grey with a couple of the brown to give this sort of medium brownish colour. There is a dark brown in the range, but that is considerably darker than what I've mixed up. And dark, oh, that's black, I'm an idiot. Here's the brown. Haha, I'm just testing. Here's the dark brown. It's a lot darker than what I've mixed. Perhaps doesn't look it from there, but trust me. And I didn't want it this dark, especially on these corrugated parts. So here it is, mixed up as it comes. I haven't thinned it any further. I find it to be quite a good consistency straight out of the bottle. And I'm going to apply that to the places where I want it to be. I don't tend to go with the method of plastering everything with wash and then having to work quite hard to wipe it all off again. I work on the premise that I will put wash roughly, mostly tweezers, it's a bit of hair. I put the wash roughly where I want it. There will inevitably be a little bit extra here and there, but I put it where I want it, and then the clean-up efforts are relatively minimal. Sometimes it doesn't need cleaning up at all. As I'm doing here. So all I'm doing is adding it, letting it run into the corners and things, and it just provides that little sort of highlight, I suppose. Delineates the detail a little bit. The seat back, the leather seat pad, I painted by hand with a brush with Guns Hobby Colour. This is the acrylic paint. It says H406, which is chocolate brown, the German World War II dark brown colour. And then I kind of dry brushed it while it was all still a bit tacky with H402, which is the green brown German tank colour. It's my favourite seat harness colour. Just to give a little sort of hint of the sort of cracking and wear effect that you can get on a leather seat pad. And I will matte that down a touch. As you can see, it does come out quite glossy. It's just painted with a brush. No trickery evident there at all. So again, just get that wash into the recesses and what have you. Paint a little bit into the seat panel, smudge that around to give some dirtying. This is still probably a little overly dark on this corrugated stuff. But it really is as simple as this. Paint it in where you want it. And just remember, the more you put on, then the more you've got to take back off again. It's much easier to control the effect if you go steady when you're putting it on. You can see it really does just bring the details to life. It pops them out of the surface so much. It's kind of a little bit in those footboards again for a dirt effect. As we take that off again, you can smudge it around, leave little bits of it there to help provide that sense of use, a used area. There we go. Right, now when it comes to removing the wash, there's lots of different ways of doing it. For this I'm mostly going to use a cotton bud. I'm going to demonstrate in a minute. And to remove it I'm using this. It's really pointless showing you the bottle because what is in here isn't really what it says on the label, although it kind of is. This is old Terps. I think the colour isn't just the liquid, the bottle is a bit yellow too. But this is most of this actually came out of defunct ammo of MIG wash bottles. When they separated, I, being the tightwad that I am, saved the Terps and I've chucked it all in there. And I find with removing enamel wash that there's a balancing act to be had between how long you leave it to dry and what you use to remove it with. It all gives different effects. If your surface is very, very glossy, it's very easy to remove all of the wash straight away and not really get the effects that you want. If your surface is very dull or very flat, it can be very difficult to remove the wash to get the effect that you want, or you might want that effect. On say like a TPS aircraft that's very dirty, that can be quite a good way of getting that ingrained dirt look, is actually to put enamel wash on a matte surface. With the Tamiya, I find if you leave it for too long to dry, it gets quite difficult to remove. So this has been left for roughly half an hour, I think, ish, and I've started to take it away again. So on the seat, it's been blended and removed to give a sort of a smudgy, dirty appearance. Likewise, on the oil tank and these areas, it's been blended and removed to suit. I've already also done the rear part of this, so I'm going to look here at the sort of foot plate areas that are a bit easier for you guys to see. Hopefully, it seems a bit bright from the light. Let's try it like that. So, cotton bud and paintbrush, these are the tools needed, and just a piece of tissue. Paintbrush, any old paintbrush, something fine-ish, but something that you don't mind ruining a little bit as well. So you need to get your cotton bud, dampen it. It doesn't want to be soaking wet, so I try to dip it in a fairly minimal way, and then I will squeeze it in the tissue and dab it so that it's really just moistened, it's not wet. If it's too wet, it will just wipe everything straight off. And then let's get that where you can see. We just go in and start really just buffing it off. I mean, in the rear part here, I just want to do exactly that. I just want it to outline the detail pretty much, so that's easy. Just like that. The front parts though, I want to leave them a little bit dirty looking, so that's a slightly different sort of setup. Hopefully you can see, I don't know if the cotton bud's getting in the way of what's happening, but it will just gradually start to let the wash move, and at that point I'm stopping with the cotton bud and I'm coming in with the brush. This is also slightly moistened, not much, and you can, with this very slightly damp brush, can get a hold of the wash and you can just kind of move it around. You can leave little smears and little dabs. Some bits darker and dirtier, some bits cleaner. It's a little bit artistic, I admit. But in terms of the difficulty, it really isn't difficult to do if you know how to do it. If you know that this is going to produce this effect, it's not hard to actually do it. And that I'm going to leave pretty much like that. So I'll do it again on this left hand foot plate. So I'll go in with the cotton bud first. Just slightly reactivating the wash, waking it up a little bit to make it a little easier for the brush. If you have too much thinners on the brush, it will just move it all too quickly and you won't be able to get the smears and things quite so easily. And as I say, the duller the paint surface, the easier it is. There, I quite like that as it is already. I've managed to blend it but leave it really dirty and I can still see the chipping. Just like that. And then on this serrated portion I will just pretty much do the same, activate it with the cotton bud and start it moving. Just work it in, blending it, moving it. This is more, I'm not really so concerned about dirty effects here as it's just highlighting the detail really. Now my washes are complete here. I did not do any further. I added a little bit of sort of speckling and muck around these floorboards and this has all been left to dry. This isn't glued yet, I'll show this in a while. And that's where I've ended up with that. The seat pad, I applied a coat of VMS satin with a brush. It's still quite shiny, but it is replicating a leather seat pad, so I think that the bit of sheen isn't really a problem. But that is where the part is at right now. So attention will be switched at this point to commencing now to this photo etch fret. As I've already mentioned a few times, this is an Edward Zoom set and these sets are marketed as a slightly simplified and affordable set which mostly focuses on cockpit or internal detail. There are sometimes other aspects on the sheets depending on the subject, but effectively this one is all for the cockpit and the turret. So firstly let's look at tools. This is the first time I've featured photo etch in a modelling for beginners type video. So what do you need in terms of tools to deal with photo etch parts? The first thing you need is a suitable cutting surface, and that's why the photo etch sheet is on this little piece of plastic. There are lots of different things you can use. I have this is a piece of plastic card. It's couple of 3mm thick probably, bit of plastic card, and this is perfectly adequate. It's nice, firm, it's hard enough, but it's also soft enough that you're not going to instantly blunt your scalpel blades all the time. If you use a piece of glass or a spare sort of bathroom tile or something like that, they're perfectly suitable, but they will dull your blades very, very, very quickly. Talking of blades then, you need something with which to cut the parts from the fret, and I do just use my standard scissor Swan Morton number 3, and I have in it a number 15 blade, number 15, 1-5. And I use those because of the fact that the end of the blade has got this curve on it, and that allows me to use it the way I need to for this. You can cut photo etch parts from a fret with a nipper. If you're going to do that, and there are times when it's a useful thing to do, please don't use your expensive Display or Tamiya or God hand nippers, you will ruin the blades in a very, very short amount of time if you do that. Get some specific shears for the use of for doing this. These are Xuron, that's got an X. Photo etch nippers, as you can see, they've got quite a fine point. They're really quite easy to use, and they're basically like hardcore scissors, and you can cut photo etch without distorting the parts. Obviously, if you're trying to cut tiny parts out with something like this, you are going to cause some distortion, so it isn't always relevant to use a nipper, but sometimes they're useful for trimming things down, or even just for trimming off little sort of nubs or whatever. Photo etch shears. Then you're going to need a sanding board. This is the same one I've already been using throughout the build. You can use a needle file if you'd prefer, but I find that the sanding sticks are perfectly adequate. A pair of tweezers, some decent tweezers that you're comfortable with using. They need to be of a relatively fine point because some of these parts are very small. And lastly, we need some form of adhesive. There are two main ways to attach photo etch to your model. One is super glue or cyanoacrylate. Here is some AK ultra resistant cyanoacrylate glue, standard density. I'm unsure what it's resistant to. This label is clearly resistant to staying attached to the bottle. Maybe it's resistant to bear attack. I don't know, but it's resistant to something, and the use of the word magnet implies that it will stick things well. So super glue is one, and the other is this type of glue. This is Amov MIG Ultra Glue acrylic. It says on it it's for photo etching clear parts, and it is effectively a sort of a turbocharged white glue. It is water based. You can clean it up with water if you need to, but it is very, very sticky and extremely effective at sticking photo etch parts to the model. A third way, which is a little bit more esoteric, but I do use it on occasion, is to use a clear varnish with some small parts, sometimes depending where they're going to be stuck to and how much pressure they're likely to be under once they're fitted. I do sometimes literally use this clear to stick pieces down or to help seal them in. Okay, with that covered then, you need to go back to the Edward instruction leaflet, and you remember I already scanned through this. It is useful, if not important, to regularly look at these as you're going through the build, because sometimes you'll find if you don't do things in the right order, you won't be able to do things, or it will be very much more difficult. It's also useful for, as already discussed, deciding whether or not to even use the photo etch. It isn't always an improvement, honestly, there are a few parts in this set that I'm not going to use, as we already know. But what you can identify from looking at this is that some, and you can see it on the fret too, some of these parts aren't painted, and indeed some of them do need to be green, and they mainly fit to these side frames. So that's what we're going to look at now. Adding some of these parts to the side frames. So I'll start with this side panel, and we'll put my scientist glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. And I need to cut out part 22, 23 and 42 to add on to this. The numbers for the parts are very easy to see, they're very clear. Edward's stuff is really good in that respect. I'll start with 22, which is just here. Now, if you hold your knife at an angle as I am here and lightly drag it from the etch part to the edge, you'll hear a click. That's telling you exactly where the edge of the part is. using that click and that feel with the blade, line yourself up as close as possible to the edge of the part and then push down. There's no dragging motion. If you stop trying to cut like this, you're going to ruin your blades and you're going to ruin the photo etch parts as well, because they'll bend and they'll twist and they'll distort. So find the edge, push straight down. You may have heard the click that time as the blade went through. I've been cutting out part 21 instead of part 22. Definitely hearing these clicks. Now when you come to the last one, you need to encapsulate the part so it doesn't twang off into next week. I'd usually just use my finger, find the edge, push straight down. It doesn't take much force, and that's the part released. Once the part's off the fret, you can with great difficulty pick it up and have a look and see how much fret needs to be cleaned up. This isn't too bad, but there is a little bit. So what I do is make sure I've got hold of the part using tweezers or my hands, whichever's easiest. Just using the sanding stick, just drag it across the edge there a couple times, and that's enough just to smooth out those little just the same as cleaning the sprue stubs off your plastic parts. And there we go, that's ready to fit. So, identifying where it needs to go is the next part. Compare your part to the drawing, and I need to fit this piece of photo etch in this gap here, and I need to fit it in that orientation. So with this one I'll use super glue. Don't try and apply super glue direct to your parts, very likely to ruin things. I've put some super glue on a small piece of plastic that's at the side of the bench here, and then I've got a cocktail stick with a reasonably decent end on it, pointed. Dip that in the glue and apply the glue to the area you want the piece of photo etch, and then trying to work relatively quickly, grab hold of it, make sure the orientation is correct, and then drop it, because we've got all the time in the world, and that glue is already going off. Introduce it to the part. Make sure it's correctly aligned. And there it is, fitted. So this time then, to glue it, I'm going to show you another method that I often use with photo etch, and it helps to alleviate the issues I just had with the first part of the super glue drying too fast. This time I pick up the part with the tweezers as before, and I deliberately hold it right the way over to one edge, and over here on my little glue puddle I'm going to do a Bob Ross, and I'm going to dip this piece of photo etch into the glue at an angle, and I'm going to produce a roll of glue on the edge of the part. Then when I come to fitting it, I will kind of paint the glue onto the join area and then stick the part straight down. And there's the second part added. This can be a little bit quicker and easier depending on the part. With small tiny parts it isn't always possible, honestly, to do it that way, but that is another option. Now, just like any other part of a model, sometimes you need to fettle, trim, fill, sand, etc. with photo etch as well. And with these parts here, I've sanded them back a little bit so that they're flush with both edges here, and then I've added this front piece, and I And when doing so, once it's glued down, I've just run a little bit of super glue along this corner to try and sort of get rid of the join. I don't want that to show. And that's those 3 pieces in. So with that done, I'm now going to look at how to make a box, because one of the other parts needed here is this box made out of part 40. So the notation on the instructions isn't particularly intuitive in my opinion. Number 40, you can see it's a photo etched part, but it's clearly a box. You can tell that you're supposed to fold it by this little curly arrow that Edward included on the instructions. So if we cut out part 40, which is here, same as before, just a little swipe with that sanding stick just to make sure there's no protrusions where the attachment points were. You can tell very easily by dragging your finger along it if it's smooth or not. And on this part you can see on the reverse side it's partially etched through to form those lines, and those are your fold lines. Now you might think that what you need to do now is get a photo etch bending tool and mess around to bend it, but you don't need to, because these lines are here. It's extremely easy to bend these parts, so I just use my tweezers, and in exceptional circumstances or with very fragile parts I'll use 2 pairs of tweezers, one to hold each side of the bend. If you try to decide on a logical course of bending action to minimise restricting your own access to the parts, and you just carefully bend till they all meet together like so to form a little box. Obviously Edward have only deemed it necessary to provide enough edges for that to appear to be a box from the top. That's fine, but it doesn't leave much area for gluing, so I think I'm going to get something in the back of that to help me glue it down. I'll find a piece of plastic card that's roughly the right thickness and stick that in there. Now here's another part that needs a bit of folding. This is the small shelf thing there, and again this is the top as you look at it on the fret, and from the bottom you can see that it's partially etched through, and again the tweezers are the best tool to use here. It will bend extremely easily. Just fold it over on itself like so, and it produces that little bit of raised detail on the part. Same goes here with the end. Just really carefully tweak it with the tweezers, and then squeeze the fold so that the part lies back on itself like that. And again, this is meant to fit onto this side framework here, but there's just a absolutely minimal gluing area because this is just a piece of photo etch. So again, what I will do is add a little piece of plastic card on the bottom that will be invisible when this is fitted, just to help support the part in situ. Otherwise it's going to fall off at the slightest excuse, and definitely once you've sealed the fuselage together and you can't then fix it. So as I had already done with the radio box there, I added some plastic card into the back so that it has got a more solid gluing surface. Here I shall add a little bit of plastic card underneath to act as a sort of shelf bracket, really, just to help hold the part in position on the fuselage side frame. And I'm going to continue with this, adding all of these small pieces of photo etch that need to be painted in the green colour and it's just a case of working your way methodically through all the parts, figuring out what goes where, folding and gluing. Okay, these side frames are done, and I now need to paint these again with the green. You can see the little photo etch shelf is in situ, and if I just show you from underneath, you can see my little plastic card shelf brackets, entirely non-prototypical, but you cannot see them when the part is fitted, as it will be in the model. So that is the extent of the photo etch work that needs to be done, that then needs to be painted green. So I'll get on and do that, and it will get the same wash treatment as the rest of the interior. But now for this second part, I just want to show you how to put the instrument panel together. Now the 3D decals could not be simpler. They are very simply a single part, which is very, very easy to put into position on your model. Photo etch is a little bit different, and most, well, certainly Edward's pre-coloured photo etches, it works in the same way. There are in fact 3 layers to this instrument panel. The first one is this one. This is just a flat piece with the printing for the actual dials on it. The second layer is this one, which has got holes which coincide with all of these dial patterns. The third layer is this one here. This is the blind flying panel, or the big 6. This layer goes on top of the second layer, which you can see is printed again with the dial detail. There is in fact a fourth part, which I suspect is this one here, which fits up the top, and all of this together creates the sort of 3D effect, the relief that you need to convincing instrument panel. But it is a bit more work and a little bit more effort than a 3D decal. So the very, very first thing I'll do is I'll get some matte coat in the airbrush, some matte clear, and I'm going to spray all of these sort of parts that are the external finished parts. As you can see, there's a reasonable sheen on it all. It isn't unrealistically shiny, but there's always a very slight kind of dotty effect with the printing on these, and I find that the flat coat lessens that a little bit, and it also enables us later, when we put something into these dials to represent the glass, it gives it the contrast between a satin matte surface and the gloss of the dial. So first thing I'm going to do is spray the part with some flat clear. Alright, this has been flat coated. You can see the sort of areas on the fret, you can see where I've been. I've basically flat coated all the parts, and hopefully you can also see how the parts appear a bit less speckly now. Maybe you can see the sheen difference with the part that I have not flatted there. So to start the process off then, exactly the same as before, using the chisel end of this number 15 blade, and starting off with that first piece. And we'll remove it from the fret, like so. As before, a little tickle with a sanding stick. You can, with things like instrument panels, fairly successfully remove any nubs after they're fitted, but it's quite a large part, so it's easy enough to handle it and do it now. Okay, now that needs to attach to the kit plastic instrument panel backing. Give it a little test fit, and it is absolutely perfect, spot on by Edward. Now this time I'm going to show use of the ultra glue method. The ultra glue method is really, really good. It does stick it really firmly. There's no real disadvantage with using it over super glue, apart from if you want to sand things. And it takes a little bit longer. The advantages, and this will particularly come into play for those of you who are not used to using photo etch, and potentially not really used to using super glue either, is time. There is just a little bit of time available to you to get your part lined up where you want it. So I've used a clean cocktail stick and I've applied some glue. You don't need to go absolutely nuts, just have some glue on there, and I'm going to place the piece of photo etch on top, and then I can just shimmy it into position, and once it's in position I'm going to get my tweezers across the whole part and I'm just going to press it down firmly. You may well find when you do this that some glue will squeeze out, as it is doing here, and that's absolutely fine because this is water-based glue. So I'm going to take a clean cotton bud, moisten it, use water or just stick it in your mouth. I'm just going to go around the edges and remove the excess adhesive. It's as quick and easy as that. All excess adhesive is removed and that's that stuck into place. Now if you pull and twist and shove on it, it will still come off. At this point it takes a little while for this to be completely dry, especially because there's no way for the air to get to the glue, so it will take a while, but for basic handling to continue the construction of this part, this is well enough stuck. So the next part then is to cut away the second part of the instrument panel. Like so. Not quite get that one. And again, a little bit of a clean up. Be forgiven for thinking I live in New York, wouldn't you? It seems to always get sirens every time I'm filming. Okay, and that then sandwiches on top of the panel we just fitted. It's worth a little test fit just to make sure everything lines up properly, and indeed it does. And we're going to apply adhesive to this again, but this time I need to be a little bit careful because I don't particularly want glue where these dial faces are. It's not the end of the world if some goes there because this does dry perfectly clear, but I don't especially want glue in those areas. So I'll make sure I apply enough elsewhere. And around them, like so. And exactly the same. Sandwich this second part of the panel down on top of the first, and again there's time to just test and adjust, and this exactly the same again. I'll use the tweezers across the entire part to press it down. There it is, and again with the cotton bud remove any excess adhesive. And finally, of course, I'll add the blind flying panel and that smaller supplementary panel to the top. Exactly the same method. And once you've got everything in situ, then leave the whole thing to dry for a good while, preferably, you know, a couple of hours minimum, overnight if possible, so that the ultra adhesive has plenty of time to fully set up. And once it's fully set up, trust me, you'll have a lot of trouble disassembling this panel if you wanted to. Now this instrument panel has had plenty of time to dry. Everything is securely dried and set up, nothing's going to move now. What I've done in the meantime is using this same little sanding board. I have been around and just made sure these photo etch parts don't overhang the plastic part at all, because that can incur fit issues with the rest of the kit, and it does happen sometimes, so it is worth looking at. And you can see there the different layers of photo etch. And what I do tend to do as well with things like this, once all of the glue and everything is dry, you've probably already noticed that I have painted around the compass. A piece of photo etch sits in on top of that. I've painted around that with a brush, which I did at the same time I was just coating these areas in black on the side walls. Because these pens, this is an AK real colour marker, I really like these. I use them a lot for exactly things like this. But the nib, as you can see here, it is quite large, and it won't easily fit in to get around that compass area without risking painting all over the instrument panel itself. Hence I did that with a paintbrush instead. But the markers are just a lot quicker and easier. I am in shot, thankfully. Okay, and I just nip around it, just cover up any of these bright glowy brass edges. I'm not sure how much of this is likely to be seen, but using these pens I can do these kind of touch-ups at any point. Quick, easy, and no clean-up. So there's that touched in. Okay, there was a little nick on the front there. So the next thing I need to do is add the instrument faces, the glass bit. There's a few ways of doing that. You can use a clear lacquer, a clear coat, but clear coats tend to need multiple applications to build up a really good, solid gloss effect. So what I use is this stuff. There are other versions of this available, so if you can't get hold of the microscale stuff, don't panic. Just look for anything that does this job. And this is again a type of PVA, and it's another thing that you can use for sticking photo etching if you really want to. Excuse me. I don't have a cold, incidentally. I know I sniff a lot. People have pulled me up for it in the past. I do suffer, though, annoyingly, from seasonal allergies, hay fever. So that's where the sniffing is about. So I've got a cocktail stick. It's a fresh, clean one, and I've sanded the tip to a nice point. And I just get some of this. I'm going to tip that round upside down so I can see a little bit better. It's going to be very hard for me to do this in such a way that you can actually see what I'm doing. I've got a little bit of the crystal clear on this cocktail stick, and what will happen if you just dot that into the panel, absolutely nothing will happen. The glue just doesn't really run off the tip of a cocktail stick. It's quite thick, so what you have to do, get it on the end there, and then put the tip into the instrument you're trying to fill, and run it around the edge just carefully, and let the edge of that bead of this PVA stuff touch the edge of the panel, and when it does, the clear will pop off and it will fill the instrument. You can see now that it's white. And there we have it. Let's do another. My little bead of the white glue on the end of my cocktail stick. Pop the end of the stick in there and just let the edge of the bead of glue catch the edge of the second layer of photo etch, and it will allow the glue to be drawn off the cocktail stick and into the dial. You have to be very, very careful not to overdo it. can be quite difficult with very small dials. Because the bead of this PVA stuff will, it will only go so small. There we go, that's the second one in. Once the PVA is in there, you can add more just by dipping it in and sort of capillary will draw it off the cocktail stick nice and easily. But the key thing is just to realise that literally just dabbing the stick into the instrument won't let the glue run off the cocktail stick. You have to let it touch the edge. And as long as you don't have too much on the cocktail stick, once it hits the edge, it will kind of run itself around and just fill up the dials nice and neatly. This is how it's looking. Lovely and neat. Now with very, very, very small dials, as I say, it's quite hard using this technique to get it in the dial and nowhere else. So with very, very small ones, you might wish to actually use your clear coats instead. But equally with very, very small ones, the benefits of having this glazing in there are minimal as well. So, choose your poison, really. Now, whilst you're doing this, if you do find that you overdo it and you get too much, just get some water, a little bit of water, an old paintbrush, and you can wash it out, dry the thing off, dry the panel off again, and then reintroduce the PVA. So you can do it as many times as you need to get it right. And as it dries, this white milky appearance will disappear and you'll be left with a lovely high gloss dial effect, glazing effect in your dials. And worth noting as well that the more modern Eduard photo etch has got pre-glossed dials, so you do not need to carry out this step at all. Now a while has elapsed since I glazed up these instruments, and I'll just show you these quickly. Here we go. You see we've now got some glass in our dials, and that's the instrument panel pretty much finished. And whilst that crystal clear was going off, while that was setting, I applied all of the small coloured photo etch panels as per the instructions to the other parts of the sidewalls, basically, which now look like this. And I've fitted both sidewalls into the fuselage halves, basically just for ease of handling. So at this point then, all that's left to do of this photo etch before joining the fuselage halves is to fit the seat harnesses, which you can see are still here. And there are one or two other very, very small parts, but I wanted to leave that until the fuselage halves were together, so there's less chance of me breaking them off again. Those parts are specifically the two small handles which go on these instruments here, and these two fold up parts which are brackets which fit into this sort of cockpit combing area. So before I do any of that, what I want to do now is add some highlights to this finish. So it was painted, just flat painted with this green colour, it was cleared, and then I added the wash, which was a mixture of the dark grey and the mid brown. So what I want to do now is pick out the highlights, if you like, do the opposite of what the wash is doing and pull up the raised detail. And the way I'm going to do that is with a dry brush. You can do that by specifically painting areas if you wish, in the sort of, so say, Spanish style. That is very time consuming, but can look extremely effective, although arguably, and in my opinion, it doesn't look especially realistic. But it's a style, it's a stylistic finish, and if that's what you want, then go for it. I'm going to dry brush, and I'm going to use oils. Abteilungs to be precise, because that's what I have. I don't think there's any massive advantage with using a modelling oil paint over a sort of standard artist oil paint. Use what you've got or what you can get hold of. But then colour, what colour to use? So clearly I need a lighter colour than this green. And ideally, if you have a lot of different colours of oil paint and you want to, you can mix a paler version of this colour using various things. Something along the lines of some sky would work. Now I don't have a sky coloured oil paint, nor am I going to mix one. I'm going to show you the three sort of options from within my oil arsenal, if you like. I have white. This one is called light mud, but it's basically a very pale sand. And this one here is called copper oxide blue brackets patina, and this is a very pale blue. I almost never dry brush anything with white. Pretty much the only thing I would dry brush with white is white, to be honest. It's too much of a colour shift. The thing with dry brushing is if you're too heavy handed with it, it doesn't really look very good. It needs to be very subtle to work well. Again, my opinion. So the next one here, light mud, this sort of pale sand beigey sort of tone. This can work on almost any colour actually. And the reason I'm not going to use it on this occasion is that on this sort of a base colour, it can serve to almost blend the highlights too much. It's not quite distinct enough from the green to really work as a dry brush. It's something you'd be more likely to use if you wanted to add a dust effect really. So I'm going to use the blue. Here is the colour. It is something along the lines of somewhat similar to sort of an RLM 65 sort of shade, and the reason this one will work is because it complements the base colour. It's brighter, but at the same time it's in the same sort of tonal zone, so it can serve as a highlight and be noticeable without being in your face like white would, or without just muddying things, no pun intended, like the earth shade would. To carry out this dry brushing then, you just need a brush. You can of course buy a specific dry brushing brush from certain manufacturers. I of course have not. This is the one I'm using. It's just an old, cheap, sort of synthetic bristle brush. I personally find that the straight sort of, this kind of shape brushes work well for dry brushing. You want something that's relatively soft, but it doesn't want to be too soft. Equally, it doesn't want to be too firm. So this is, as I say, a standard synthetic bristle brush, and you can see it's been used a fair bit and it's all a bit messed up. Certainly wouldn't be any good for actually painting with, but for dry brushing it's just fine. So method then, you need to gather some paint on the brush, which is as simple as just dipping it in, and then using your piece of cloth, I'm removing most of the paint from the brush, but at the same time I'm also kind of mixing it onto the brush till I can virtually see nothing coming off. And then I simply pick up the part I'm going to dry brush and just gently bring the brush across the surface. Now if you've got just enough paint on there, it will serve to pick up those high points just subtly. In my opinion, if you can really see that some dry brushing has been done, it's been overdone. But as I say, that is just my opinion. If you want to do it more, then do it more. And quite simply, add paint to the brush and then dry brush the model until the effect resembles what you think you want to see. Be careful around the black parts, because the dry brushing itself is far more obvious on black parts than it is green. And by adjusting the angle, I'm coming at it from all of the directions so that all of the edges get a little bit, pick a little bit up and not just from one direction. And what you should find with care is there's just this ever so subtle shift in the appearance where that relief becomes slightly more obvious to a casual glance, but not to the point where there's a sort of coloured outline on everything, which I believe in some circles is known as cake frosting. So there it is, pretty much as the name implies, it's a virtually dry brush and I'm brushing this colour around. Do experiment. You can use a scrap model, scrap parts, and find a combination of colours and brush and what have you that suits what you want to see. If you don't want to dry brush the part, then don't. It's not obligatory. But hopefully you should just be able to pick up just a little touch of a highlight by doing this. Just adds a certain something to the interior. Now if you don't have any oil paints, don't worry, you can in actuality dry brush with any paint at all. You can use enamels, you can use acrylics. I wouldn't suggest that lacquers are very good for it, to be honest. They dry too fast and they'll dry on the brush and not really transfer to the model at all. And of course, like the specific dry brushing brushes, you can also buy dry brushing paint from the usual suspects. I'm not certain that I've noticed any particular advantage with using this over my oil paints, other than the fact that this is a water-based acrylic, so there's that slight benefit in ease of cleanup and lack of any odour, and also the drying time is greatly reduced. The drying time for this isn't huge, but you will find as it is oil, it's quite easy to smudge it and again, no pun intended, muddy the effect with handling if you're not careful. Now pretty much the final piece of the photo etch puzzle for this particular interior comes down to the seat harnesses, and I've found over the years that the best way, or my favourite way to deal with harness straps is to shape them, it's to pre-shape them if you like. So I've cut them off the fret in the normal way. The shoulder strap, you have these buckles, those need to be folded over onto the front, just the same as all the other parts, just with the tweezers, just gently bring them over onto the front face like that. And I've not showed it on camera because it is extraordinarily fiddlesome, and trying to carry it out in such a way that it's visible on film and you can still see what I'm doing is honestly incredibly difficult. So essentially I take a seat strap and I introduce it and I hold it in place with tweezers or whatever and use cocktail sticks, swearing, holding my breath, all of the known available accessories to fine detail work are used to shape the belt into a situation where it looks like I want. So the belts were attached, if you can see where I'm going here, to the seat frame, so I held it in that position with the tweezers over the top of the seat side like so, and then I just used cocktail stick, just isn't going to sit there, to shape the belt so that it sat the way I wanted. So now because it's pre-shaped, there's no stress on it when it's in position, which means that I can glue it in place with the ultra glue or similar, and it's not an issue because you're not asking the glue to hold the belt into any particular shape or position, and that's quite important. If you're going to use the glue to help you with the positioning, you're going to have to use super glue, and you do run, well, it's more than a risk, it's almost inevitable really, that the super glue at some point or another is going to pull the paint off the parts and just make a right mess, to be honest. That is just what happens, and there we go, that's the first one. in position there. So the glue's just tacking it in place down the side of the seat, and it's just going to sit there. And the same is true for the second lap strap and indeed the main harness. I've already shaped it, not all the way as you can see, but pretty much where I want it. If you shape it fully you can't fit it, but I want the harness to go through that hole that I made earlier in there, and it's going to go all the way down on the back side to sort of disappear behind the metalwork. So I'm going to finish fitting these harnesses off camera, and then I'm going to put all the parts of the cockpit together and into one side of the fuselage half to show how the completed cockpit is going to look. And here it all is fitted into the right hand fuselage half. I've chosen randomly to glue it into that side. It really doesn't matter which way around you choose to do it. Everything fits in here very nicely indeed. There's a little bit of warpage both with the sort of fuselage halves of the kit and various parts of the interior. As you can see, maybe the gap here is tapered. Don't worry too much about it. It all sorts itself out as you put the rest of the kit together. You do need to be careful lining everything up. The instrument panel, for instance, just slots onto these sort of upper shelves of the interior. It's not a super secure location, so do be careful when you're lining everything up. It's easy to damage the photo etch that's been fitted, and in some cases you could find that the photo etch actually inhibits things from fitting together. In this case, as I think you can probably tell, no such issues. Make sure that the slots in the instrument panel are clear of any excess adhesive or overhanging photo etch, and that the instrument panel will in fact engage on the bracket there where it's supposed to, and you shouldn't really have any issues. And as you can see, that closes itself up nicely when everything is aligned. And also nothing is stopping the fuselage halves from going together. If you find that your fuselage halves are not going together, then there is something in the way, so take it apart and investigate. So there we go. That is the fitting of a full zoom photo etch. Some washing, some dry brushing, all done in one video. Now I'd like you to bear in mind time. This video is going to be around an hour, and a lot has been done inside that hour. In real time this has taken a lot more than an hour, and I'm relatively experienced with doing this sort of work. In actuality, the time taken to carry out the work since episode 1 and to the end of this episode is of the order of 8 to 12 hours. It's quite a long time. So don't fret if things seem to be taking ages, because this isn't a quick process, frankly. So that's going to wrap things up for episode 2. Looking forward to episode 3. We'll get these fuselage halves joined together, deal with the seams here and on the wing parts, and start looking at adding some of that rivet detail, utilising the plans in the book and what have you. So hopefully this has been useful to those of you following along, and to those of you who are not, hopefully you may have picked up some little trinkets along the way anyway. Regardless of that, thank you very much for watching, and thank you for all of your support as always. And with all of that said, I think it only remains for me to say until next time, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.